The MEI Art Gallery showcases the most exciting contemporary and modern art from the Middle East. Our current exhibit, Perceptible Rhythms, Alternative Temporalities, features 12 artists who explore the impact of conflict, urbanization, and the climate crisis on their environments. Open Monday through Friday from 10 to 5 p.m., the MEI Art Gallery is open to the public, or book your visit today at mei.edu/arts and culture center. From Washington, D.C., this is Middle East Focus.
Greetings to our listeners. My name is Lyne Sneige, and I'm the director of the Arts and Culture Center at the Middle East Institute. Today's podcast is one of the several programs coming out of our current exhibition, Perceptible Rhythms, Alternative Temporalities, an exhibition looking at issues of sustainability, climate, and our relationship to the environment at the MEI Art Gallery. We have just extended the exhibition until the end of May. So if you are in DC, stop by the MEI Art Gallery. We are open Mondays to Fridays from 10 a.m. to 5 p.m. It is really a beautiful and thoughtful show, so I hope you have a chance to see it. The exhibition is presented with the Abu Dhabi Music and Arts Foundation and curated by London-based independent curator and researcher Maya Al-Khalil, and features the work of 12 artists who, to the backdrop of the region's social realities such as migration, conflict, rapid urbanization, layered over a worsening climate crisis, are exploring notions of histories, collective memories, and are calling for humankind to develop new ways of connecting with and caring for the environment. Their work brings a new perspective to the table in this climate and sustainability conversation. Turning back to our segment today, I am joined by two of our participating artists in the exhibition, Moza Matrooshi from the UAE and Sleiman from Lebanon. Hello to both of you, and thank you so much for joining me today. We are so honored to be hosting you on our platform. Both your work, although different, are rooted in food politics, collective memory, and histories of the region and the countries and communities you are from. And food is such a social connector. And at the same time, it is also so personal and intimate, at the heart of our identity of who we are and where we come from. It is about our past and our stories. But of course, it is also tied to the theme of sustainability and the very important element of food security, which has been on the minds of so many because of realities of war, climate, and water scarcity. So I'm eager to talk about all of this with you and dive into your work and the vision and inspiration that drive your practice. But first, allow me to introduce you briefly before we go straight into the conversation. Moza Matrooshi examines Arabian Peninsula mythologies and their relation to nation building. This culminates in fictions and metaphors derived from regional food production practices as well as food politics. In 2019, Moza earned a culinary arts diploma from Dubai's ICCA, and in 2020, an MFA from the United Kingdom's Slade School of Fine Art. Her artwork were performed in London's Victoria and Albert Museum, selected by the ICA as well as the BBC, amongst others. She is currently a faculty fellow in the Sheikha Salama Emerging Artist Fellowships in Abu Dhabi. Welcome, Moza.
Thank you for having me.
Absolutely. Sleiman is a Lebanese artist. His practice examines the concept of vegetative souls, a term first used by Aristotle to describe plant life and its capacity for nutrition, growth, and reproduction. And through this concept, he examines minor rituals, fabulations, and recipes. Using food as a medium for day-to-day survival, his practice weaves a collection of invitations between foraging, cooking, and serving food to explore the political implications of eating and the communal value that comes with it. Sleiman has been featured in numerous exhibitions, including You Can Discourse Without Disco in Croatia, How Will It End in Brussels, Civic City in Centre Pompidou in France. He received a BA in Fine Arts from the Lebanese University and a master's degree in architecture from the University of the Holy Spirit in Lebanon. And welcome, Christian.
Hello, thank you for the invitation.
Of course. So, Moza, I want to turn to you first. And your practice focuses on food, but also on so many other things like rituals, histories, politics, and how those themes are related to nation building. Maybe frame your practice for us in your own words. And what was the genesis of your focus on food as a conduit to all of this?
Well, when I say mythologies, I think our minds automatically shift to histories or something very ancient and historical, but I believe that we live within mythologies daily. I'm much more interested in contemporary mythologies than I am in ancient mythologies, actually. And those are the grids that we live within, continuous nation building everywhere. But I respond to my own context as to the growth that is happening in the Gulf, but particularly in the UAE. And how that ties to food is when I was in grad school, I was looking at food as a tool that stands in for language. And that was something I explored even before grad school, but quite minimally. And then it really grew from there as something that is not just a stand in for language and a metaphorical, weighty, symbolic tool that I could rely on in my art practice, but it's opened up so many doors for me because food is one of the most important themes of our lifetime. And that has led me to look at other themes like climate change as well that are really tied so closely to food as well.
Yeah, absolutely. So that's a great segue, actually, for us to sort of explore the work that you have in the exhibition that is titled The Agricultural School, Maktoum's Honey Mountain. Can you talk about this work, talk about the video, the photos, the rocks that are included, and the relationship of the work to the nation building concept that you go back to?
So the agriculture school is an iterative work. The work that's displayed in the gallery at the moment is the second iteration. The work currently lives in three iterations. The first one was part of an exhibition in Abu Dhabi called On Foraging, and that was kind of the beginning of exploring the tensions between landscape imagination and imagery that is produced by people who live in specific landscapes in the UAE, and particularly the mountain landscapes. And so I've basically connected with different farmers or people who run farms and plantations and have taken photos from them to show in the exhibition space and work on my role as the facilitator whose shadow extends into these institutions and is able to bring images that are quite mundane to the people who have taken them, but really reframe them by putting them in an exhibition space. And with Maktoum's Honey Mountain that's on display at the moment, I wanted to further complicates this tension with imagery by presenting earth matter as well from the landscape itself. So you have the images that Maktoum not only has taken, and Maktoum is someone who lives in Ras Al Khaimah, which is an emirate in the UAE, and is someone who is preoccupied with gathering honey from wild bees, which is an ancient practice that he inherited from his grandparents and great grandparents. And so he has been collecting images of the mountain that he collects as honey from, which is also his ancestral home. And the images are not only his, actually, he prompts people to take pictures of this mountain and he runs this page where collections of photos of this mountain exist in its kind of most ideal setting. So after it has rained, it looks a bit green. And so I've taken these images from him and I've placed them in the exhibition on a table with rocks and a short video clip of what the wild bee's nest looks like when it's just ready for honey collection. And so this is the description of the work. But for me, I'm still, as this work is, slightly still new in its inception, I still wonder, how do people absorb this tension that I try to create with the images, and especially that these images are not ones that I have taken myself as the artist. My role as the artist is more as a facilitator, and how does that work?
Yeah, very interesting when you position yourself as the enabler, right?
Yes.
As the facilitator enabler. And we'll come back to some of this, Moza, but I want to turn to Christian. Christian, your practice is rooted in food, in rituals, in the collective act of consuming food, growing it. How do you use that? Maybe you can frame your practice for us. How do you use this to explore the very complex social political issues that you actually explore about Lebanon and about broader than Lebanon, which is your native country? Maybe help us understand your practice and your focus on food as a conduit to this.
Thank you for the question. So my practice starts with honestly my own interest in educating myself around the topics related to the food system that we have today. And in general, I'm interested in different methods of food production. Actually started from my upbringing. I grew up in a small village in Lebanon, and my entire family and even the entire village used to forage a lot. So I grew up with this idea related to the seasonality of food and having food for a small amount of period. And as I gradually moved to study in the city, I realized that my connection to food slightly started to change. So this kind of became my starting point to really actually get to know how food is produced, how food is distributed. And at the beginning, I started looking into it through the lens of foraging as a practice that I've been used to or accustomed to. And it gradually went into looking into politics of food and different forces that shape the food system now. And foraging also offers this contradictory kind of dynamic with agriculture. So I was interested also in the human agency in both of these different food production methods.
Very interesting. You have a beautiful piece in the show entitled Untitled Stories around trees. And the drawings and the text beautifully merge together. And you'll tell us more about it. And it's almost an urban representation of the city of Beirut through its trees. Tell us a little bit about that work and how it is positioned in your broader practice.
Okay, so the piece that is shown, it's Leporello that opens up vertically and also horizontally. It has stories of different trees from the city. And during the time when I was approached to present a work, I was moving a lot. And it made me think about the trees that actually migrated or like how trees changed in the city. So in the Leporello shown placed on the wall, you can find three stories. The first one is about the orange trees and like the citrus family in general, which is a tree that is very common on the coastal line of Lebanon. And through different economical forces, these trees were replaced with bananas. And in the early 2000s, once the banana prices dropped in value, they were replaced with avocado trees. So I was talking about this need in the city and how the city can be challenging even for trees. And another example is the fruitful tree that were originally planted by different municipalities in Beirut, and then after a lot of complaints that these fruitful trees makes the sidewalks a bit sticky, even the cars sticky, that they started to replace them, and they replaced them with trees that cannot bear fruits. And the third story was about the eucalyptus tree, which was brought with the French mandate or during the French mandate. And it was planted in different parts in the city where there was wetland. But actually, with time, eucalyptus tree sucks the water, but also sucks the nutrient out of the soil. So it kind of depletes the soil. And this is briefly what the work is about. I was also the text that is part of the Leporello talks about these trees as like families. So I was trying also to approach them as they are creature with their own agency that were being pushed away sometimes from the city or brought into the city. And this ties directly actually to my practice because I'm constantly researching different economical or political forces that shape the food system in Lebanon. And I think these are good examples of how the food system is constantly changing.
Yeah, those are fascinating, fascinating stories and a fascinating way to sort of present history and just have a different reading, right? In both your practice, you embrace performance as a medium in your work. And of course, cooking and is an act that is very performative too. But maybe you can talk a little bit about the place of performance in your practice, and we can get into the different styles of the performance. Moza, maybe you can start by sharing yours is, I've noticed, more perhaps, if I may, based on rituals, repetition, gestures. Can you talk a little bit about your use of performance and why, and what you hope that this communicates?
Yes. So performance for me became an interesting tool to draw from. It began for me when I was looking at stories that come from a place of erasure, rituals that have no specific details or there's no proper record of them, or rituals or things that completely get erased and revised in contemporary times. So there was this interesting space for me to look at, whether it was in ancient history in the Arabian Peninsula or current times. And so I was looking at performance as a set of movements that can revive this imagination of what the rituals might have looked like and become much more playful with that, and also claim that this can completely replace the set of knowledge that has been erased. And with that, it became a bit more layered. Sometimes my performances have a verbal element because language is very important to me in my practice. And so it really evolves as to what the performance is really responding to. And most of the time, that's also space, not just, this imaginary ritual or space of erasure.
I see. What about you, Christian? How do you sort of position performance in your practice? For some projects, at least, there's a lot of collaborative sharing of food and cooking together. And talk about that aspect of your use of performance in your work.
Yes, so actually, the performative part started after reading Immanuel Kant. He talks about how he believes that there's a need to share the meal with someone, and the idea of sharing a meal allows this vulnerable side of us to surface. And he compares it to cannibalism, where we actually kind of consume each other. And I kind of like this idea of how the dining table, or like where we're sharing the food, becomes a vessel of exchange and a vessel of generational knowledge. And this became kind of my starting point. So I like this idea of gathering around the table. And I see that the way that I approach performance is slightly different than what Moza does. But in my approach, I take a small story and I try to go through it or talk about it and then try to present it through food, but then opening it up for the audience to interact and intervene. And I like this kind of duality in the way that I approach these performances, because there's one part where I'm trying to set a framework and talk about a specific story or like this research that I'm doing. And on the other part, I kind of fade in the background and it's about the dynamic and the exchange that will take place there outside of my control.
So, do those conversations and encounters feed back into your projects and enrich and further your research?
Yes, I guess this is something else that kind of shaped my practice, which is the small book by Ursula Le Guin, where she talks about how the first tool that was invented by Homo sapiens was not the knives, as history kind of portrays it, but based on like recent research, the first tool was a container. And she talks about it from like a point of view in a practical sense, that before we needed to sharpen our knives to kill, we needed a container to carry the matters that we find along our journey. And she also talks about it metaphorically in the sense that we become containers of knowledge, of rituals. And I mean, every interaction becomes, if I'm looking at through this lens, then every interaction becomes leads to something else or contributes to bigger body of work, let's say. So yeah, of course, somehow I feel like these interaction feeds into my practice.
I can see exactly how you would do that. You are both interested in this sort of intergenerational transfer of knowledge, almost giving power to the way people did things in the past and using that to interpret our present and future. Talk about this a little bit and how you feel that this helps us better understand our environment and our ecosystem right now. Moza, do you want to say a few words about this in your work?
So it's an interesting question because Christian and I, this was one of our first conversations, is where do we find this agency when we approach other people and approach other people as primary sources of knowledge that are not really positioned as such in other situations or contexts. So obviously in this case, science has the biggest stake in the hierarchy of knowledge when it comes to what we're looking at, and yet we're going to kind of like the smaller foragers and farmers and asking them for their knowledge and to transfer that knowledge back to an exhibition space, and a space that they are particularly not very keen on being a part of or attending. They're not as excited perhaps as the artists to show their work there. And so this was the kinds of conversations that I was also having with them and myself and with my peers on how do you navigate all of this as you extract knowledge and present it to a larger audience in a cultural framework. And I want to say that I somehow started to resolve this by not forcing the relationships also that I've cultivated with people in certain landscapes, that I don't try to bring them into the space for certain things. So, for example, the third iteration of the agriculture school is currently on display in the Sharjah Biennial. And part of that work is largely a public program which was meant to bring in the farmers and foragers and people who keep bees and people who glean honey from the mountains, and kind of all the people that I've encountered and people who are interested in these practices to come together and share experiences and exchange. But somehow the program really did not shape up in that way. And that's partly an institutional challenge, and partly also a challenge that the people who I'm wanting to invite already have these gatherings amongst themselves and don't feel the need that they have to come to an exhibition space to feel like they're performing this gathering and this exchange of knowledge. And otherwise, they're very generous. Like when you go to them, they are so keen on passing on this knowledge and just, not tracking what you do with it. And I think maybe this is where we become a bit tied to the idea that we have to track where this research goes and how it holds a visual form or an artistic form. Whereas for them, they're really happy to just, no pun intended, plant the seeds and just, whatever grows, grows.
Mhm, mhm. What about you, Christian? How do you sort of look at this intergenerational transfer of where does it sit within your practice and what you would like to articulate?
Yeah, as I said before, I kind of look at myself as also a container. So it started with my family and how I grew up and the knowledge that I carried through them and because of them. And somehow it continued through these conversations or through making performances that are focused on food, because I realize also when people are eating, they are more talkative, they kind of feel more relaxed about it. So with me, whenever I'm exchanging with someone, there is always food around us, formally or informally. Yeah, honestly, I think that I feel like I'm repeating myself, but yeah, I really see like all these exchanges that I have with different people kind of contributes to my practice.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And it also helps build, this knowledge also that is not sometimes recorded anywhere that, we've stopped using and that is so important to this climate and sustainability conversation, right? The way to, to stop and look back at the way things were done before, right? There is more than one way to do this. Thank you both for sharing. Looking ahead, what projects are you working on now? Any sort of collaborations, any sort of big projects that you are working on? Moza?
Well, actually, I started a new job as a pastry chef. And yeah, so I'm really diving deeper and deeper as I grow myself and my practice into the world of food. And really, my biggest inspirations are food workers and their own knowledge and how they move in all the spaces that they occupy. I'm speaking from an embodied experience as well, which I think is going to shape my practice in new ways. So, this is really where the outlook of my new work is heading.
Wow, this is fascinating. What about you, Christian? Any transformational things happening in your sort of life, in your practice?
Actually, yes. I started this residency program in Lebanon. It's funded by Saradar Foundation, and it's to support like the research phase of my practice, and it's for 11 months. So actually, this is long period already. Like it's almost a year where I get to just sit in one place and get to build a stable practice, let's say, because I've been moving a lot in the last few months, and which also makes me a bit unstable, and it makes also my practice shift with me. So since I have the time now and I have a studio, I'm also exploring how my practice can be studio based, because I know that at the moment this is a privilege to have a studio and I might not get to have it later on. So my research is going in different direction. On one end, I'm focusing with the idea of politics of food. I'm focusing on the Mediterranean diet, how the rise of it, how it started, and how it kind of changed the food system. In this research, currently, I'm focusing on the history of olive oil, where it started, how it's now being cultivated, and the process that it went through, especially when there was the rise of the food industry. There was the idea of taming olive oil. And by taming means that in order for the manufacturer to produce it and to sell it for different type of audiences, they needed to tame the taste, the color, the smell. And we see it a lot in different food that we have in the supermarket. So I'm looking into how our palate and our taste bud is changing, but following the story of olive oil. Yeah, in another kind of thread, I'm looking into this idea of pharmakon, and it's this Greek word that means poison, but at the same time remedy. And I was interested to look into it through foraging, because when I was going through these foraging walk and I had like local experts guide me through it, they would always tell me about the edible shrubs, the ones that we can eat, and they would explain how to use them. And by default, my mind would go that, okay, if this is edible, then the rest of the things are toxic. So I'm interested in also looking into the ones that were not mentioned, right? The stories of these plants or the recipes of these plants that were not mentioned, and how foraging can also be on this fine line between picking something that can nourish you, but also picking something that can kill you or poison you. So I'm trying to follow these two kind of threads, and I'm excited actually to see what I'll end up knowing and learning about.
Yes, yes. Well, thank you both for all of the work you do, for sharing with us such fascinating stories and your very rich practice that deals with something as important as food, which, from the many conversations we've had now together, we've seen how food is important to so many things. Thank you for feeding our souls on this podcast. And sadly, our segment has come to an end. So I want to wish you good luck to you both. And thank you again for joining me today and for presenting and sharing your work in the exhibition. For our audience that is listening, you can come into the gallery and see the work of Moza and Christian. And if you are not in DC and cannot make it into the gallery, the works that are presented in the exhibition are also available to view on our site, www.mei.edu. You go to the Arts and Culture tab and you go into the exhibition and the works that are included in it. So thank you again, and follow us on social media, Twitter at MEI Arts Culture.
This has been a presentation of the Middle East Institute. To support MEI's programs and podcasts, please donate at www.mei.edu. Thank you for your support.